When we consider how every country has been trying, since the end of the Second World War, to frame a new statute for university, academic and scientific education, and read all that has been published in recent years, much of it written almost in a mood of panic, about the idea of the university, it is clear that the situation in which the university finds itself today is critical. Indeed, the question is even asked, has the university not lost its fundamental significance as a humanizing factor? Has it not become a heterogeneous composition of specialized studies and laboratories in which everyone goes their own way, while the great problems confronting humanity today, and thus the fate of mankind in a situation full of promise yet simultaneously critical, are really being settled outside the university? For at least half a century, the view prevailed that committed science inevitably lost its scientific character. Then, the dehumanization and, in that sense, the objectivization of learning and science, which had gone furthest in the natural sciences, suffered a severe blow when many atomic scientists found their consciences disturbed and began to question the human meaning of their discoveries. They realized, to their dismay, that their pure science was simply a function of military policy. In spite of everything, their science was, in fact, engaged not in a grand project for the humanization of life, but in military strategy. The Oppenheimer affair was the shock that led to reflection. This was just one factor among many that made men question the human meaning of science and made it clear that man cannot live by science alone. Science is only one factor in the large-scale plan to create a world more worthy of man. However much learning and science are objectivized, man still remains their subject. Our being as humans is always involved in them. It is ultimately always a question of man in his knowing, being in the world, and controlling the world. It is said that a representative of the civilized world once landed by airplane among skeptical primitive people and boasted to them that he covered a distance in one day that would take them at least a month to traverse. One wise native replied to this, "What do you do with the other 30 days then?" That is what it ultimately amounts to. The idea of the university. Every science points beyond itself to man's being, and philosophical anthropology is itself based, like all other sciences, on a metaphysical prior datum, namely, that reality exists and can, in principle, be understood. A pre-scientific view of the world precedes all science, and indeed, science is impossible without this view. After all, man experiences his existence in this world, even before he reflects upon it, or thinks scientifically about it. This spontaneous being with oneself in the world is the only access to the various branches of learning and scientific thought. We understand reality in a pre-reflective manner in this spontaneous, lived encounter with that reality. Thoughts and ideas arise, and through these ideas, we interpret reality and our life in this world in the mode of living experience. What is more, we always find ourselves in a world already full of meanings, given to it by man, a human world. No single scholar of any kind is able to avoid this historical prior datum. In this way, our immediate experience of the world is included within an interpretation of the world, man's consciousness of the world. We may therefore say that our consciousness of the world, which precedes all science, is an ideology, since human existence is always an existence that thinks about itself. The pure fact, and this is at the same time something capable of being understood, of my living as a man in a world is already living within a certain vision of reality. Pre-reflective experience, however confused it may be, is always an understanding perception, the driving force behind our seeking being. In this world is therefore an existential need. We must conceive the world in thought since it is otherwise impossible for us to live in it. The fundamental existential question, how man can sustain himself in the material, natural world, is at the origin of man's exact knowledge of his environment, of the natural sciences, and of technology. But then other questions arise. What is the purpose of living? What is the meaning of reality and of human existence within that reality? Man's unsolicited being in a world that is equally unasked for is a problem that he is unable to avoid, except by rejecting the problem as meaningless. It is possible to distinguish three closely interconnected aspects of man's conscious pre-reflective existence in the world. That is, in his pre-scientific view of the world, These are a physical image of the world, a metaphysical view of the world, and finally, an ethical view of man. Both philosophy and positive scientific research into the natural world and the humanities thus have a pre-scientific presupposition that of pre-reflective human experience. As human experience, this pre-reflective experience is, however confused it may be, always a conscious experience and therefore a view of the world. This experience is also the wide horizon or background, against which all our detailed reflection, whatever it may be, stands out. It is only when one aspect of this pre-reflective experience, for example, that of social relationships, attracts man's concentrated attention, and this is partly dependent on the social and economic situation, that a new science and a new specialized study are born. It is precisely because man's pre-scientific experience has ontological, ethical, and anthropological implications that a systematized concentration of man's attention on one special aspect of his pre-reflective experience leads to formalization. This is the task of philosophy, which, as a science, has spontaneous, pre-reflective consciousness as its sole object, and attempts to throw light on this totality as such. It takes as its point of departure a phenomenological ascertainment of the facts on which it proposes to throw light according to their intelligibility. In so doing, it does not ignore the results of research in the field of the positive sciences, since these results point to an authentic aspect of the original datum, and it does so despite the formalization, which philosophy must, to some extent, undo by means of transposition. If scientific insight is to be truly relevant to philosophy, this formalization, however, continues to stand out against the wider background, which will ignore the new, specialized field of study as such, and, despite its abstract quality, point, within the whole of man's understanding of being in the world, towards the original totality and, ultimately, towards the metaphysical prior datum. The consequence of this formalization is that a science, as a human science, will not be complete when it reaches a result, or even a certain synthesis, purely within its own formalized approach. The intelligibility of this formalized science and its achievement of practical results for man's life will undoubtedly be of great value, but the partial datum on which light has been thrown from within must ultimately be reintegrated into the totality from which it was originally derived by means of formalization. Because the content of pre-reflective experience gave rise to many formalized sciences, the so-called interdisciplinary approach is bound to play an indispensable part in this reintegration. But no reliable reflective insight into an original totality can be gained simply by dialogue between those who practice the various positive sciences and who now claim a monopoly of scientific thought for themselves, or by reconstructing this totality, by combining the partial aspects on which light has been thrown by means of formalization. Original pre-reflective experience thus requires two complementary studies. On the one hand, because of the confused character of this experience of totality, there is a need for the specialized study of the positive sciences. On the other hand, its original totality also demands an interdisciplinary approach and philosophical reflection. Leaving the question of theology aside for the time being, it is possible to say that the idea and ideal of the university, as the Universitas Scientiarum, grew from this situation. The main reason for combining the various independent branches of learning and science in one common university center is therefore not purely utilitarian, for example, simply for the purpose of accommodation. On the contrary, the university is an intrinsic demand of the intelligibility of reality and, within this, of human existence. The university is required because every partial reality is interconnected within the totality of reality, and because every branch of learning and science, however dehumanized it may be, has a human significance. As a human science, every science needs to listen to what the other sciences have to say about reality, and all sciences need to be illuminated by philosophy. The factors that bind the Universitas Scientiarum together, then, are philosophy and the idea of humanity. I shall consider the central importance of religion at a later stage. If philosophy and the idea of humanity do not constitute the basic principle of the structure of the university, then the university, as a universitas, no longer has any reason to exist. It renounces its task and vocation and becomes, from the totally human point of view, no more than a torso, a heterogeneous collection of scholars and not an ordered polis of wise, learned men from whom mankind may expect an important and indeed irreplaceable contribution to the humanization of the world and of man himself. It will not play its part in periods of crisis, and into whose hands will the fate of the world fall then? Of course, the university is not a parliament, a UNO, a world government, or an organization to help underdeveloped countries. It does not bring salvation to mankind. On the other hand, however, it does not only provide professional training, producing lawyers, doctors, social workers, politicians, and so on. The universities are the brains of the world. They place conscious human existence on the level of reflection. Scientific thought is, of course, only one of the factors that promote man's progress toward an increasingly praiseworthy humanity. Certainly, the sciences and philosophy have human value and significance only in relation to other sectors that are valuable to human life. There are also ways of making the free, simple experience of human existence in the world explicit that lie outside the realm of scholarship. But scientific thought in the university, as the Universitas Scientiarum and not simply as a collection of different sciences, has a distinctive and inalienable function that cannot be renounced without bringing disaster upon mankind. As the University of the Sciences, the university takes the pre-scientific view of the world, which is inherent to man's consciousness of being in the world, as its point of departure and ends with a critically justified idea of the world. Precisely because of its scientific thought and its academic freedom, which is bound only to the truth in order to set it free, the university points in every direction toward a view of the world, without which it is not good for man to live in this world. We have come to realize, as a result of the present crisis in the university system, that any reaction against a connection between the university and a view of the world, even though, in the past, this connection was frequently unscientific and therefore alien to the university, must be regarded, on purely scientific grounds, as superseded. Any division between the university and a view of the world is, moreover, a fiction, since the rejection of any worldview cannot be justified by positive science as such and is, therefore, an option that lies outside the realm of science. This implies, at least negatively, a view of the world